Hi everyone, welcome to PIMU Avenue. This is a show where I read a story developed from people I made up. This is from the pilot episode of People I Made Up of Vagina Eyes. And yeah, I wrote a story and I'm gonna read it. Vagina Eyes. Chapter 1. The targeted ads on Dylan's Instagram stories had become increasingly specific of late. He had gotten used to the online therapy, brain training, and self-help gurus, but felt a primal unease when he saw it for the first time. You guys, it was a burly beast of a man with thick eyebrows, a forest of a beard, and a tight black t-shirt with the word "it" printed across his rippling chest in Comic Sans. It was supposed to be the personification of loneliness, depression, anxiety, economic downslide, climate change, and the government, and looked like if Kimbo Slice and the great Kali both fell into a vat of nuclear waste and emerged as a new singular entity. Every 15-second ad followed the same formula. An unsuspecting victim staring at their phone in a dark room. It's a clip of a silhouette approaching from behind, illuminated by lightning. Then, the smoothest, most resonant voice Dylan had ever heard would start to read the ad copy. Something like, "Your bank account is empty. You are dependent on your workplace. The economy is going to crash." Its fists would emerge from the shadows on either side of the victim's head, followed by his hulking and indifferent face. You may not want to think about it, but it is coming. Then, in a split second, its biceps and chest flexed, and the face switched from indifference to what this author can only describe as cortical homunculus in anguish. The fists came hurtling towards the victim's temples with final destination level speed and spunk, and just before they collided with the victim's head, the ad would cut to a smiling and opalescent flower logo. Waste not, want not. Win-win. A new program from Hemlock Industries. It doesn't have to be the end. At first, Dylan Dew thought it was just a coincidence that the actors would be wearing shirts from his favorite movies, The Matrix or Into the Wild. He thought, I have some money in my bank account. I'm not that dependent on the movie theater. A few weeks later, however, he started to have the creeping suspicion he was somehow being directly spied upon when, in another Hemlock Industries ad, the victim was wearing a survival sweatshirt, when he just so happened to be playing his favorite song from that album on his geo-block bypass Spotify account. Shit. Dylan opened his Spotify and tried to pause Bob Marley's crooning, but his computer started to freeze, as it usually did. Babylon system is a pie. The shoddy speakers sputtered. A quick trip to Task Manager put the app out of its misery, and he proceeded to clear the history and cookies from the browsers on his computer and phone. These companies just take your data left and right, he grumbled aloud to his cracked phone screen. One night, he nervously peeked out through the curtains of his window, critically inspecting the stray dogs and small piles of garbage on his street for any covert video cameras or secret agent antennas. The ad copy had just read, "They have fired you. You have no prospects. Your future is up in the air. Your rent is almost due." Its fists flew towards the victim's head, and waste not, want not. It doesn't have to be, the end reverberated through his gripped cell phone. Needless to say, Dylan Dew felt attacked. He scooped up a handful of cold water from his leaky pipe and leaned over to splash his face. Steve Buscemi level bags under his eyes, more prominent than usual from crying, made him look like his mother did before she died. Many times, he'd caught himself resenting her for bringing into this world that she did, all while wishing she was still there. He imagined a life for himself where he didn't have to worry about rent or bills or medical expenses. Maybe exploring an uncharted continent overflowing with discovery and new opportunity, or a colony on a new planet seeking volunteers. He'd hop, skip, and jump at the chance without hesitation, but no, anything that special either didn't exist or was out of his reach. And as he pulled up a review for Hemlock Industries in one browser tab and Googled win-win program scam in the next, he conceded, I'm 28 years old. I need to get something right. Hey Lola, big of yourself. Hey Joanne, what's going on, guys? Chapter 2. Dylan Dew churned the stew. 5 months in, and he had already begun climbing the ranks of the win-win program. First, he worked in the field, now the kitchen. He had been improving in his daily brainchild and stickiness tests. He imagined getting promoted to the marketing department by the end of next year. In 2 years, fingers crossed, maybe travel the world. It was up to him, of course. You got out whatever you put in at win-win. He had never felt important or a part of anything special in his life, but now, hanging there above the glossy porcelain floor of the Hemlock Industries Seminar Building was a screen with his name on it. Dylan Dew, 52 out of 100. 62% brainchild, 41% sticky. He was practically swollen with pride every evening, looking at his rank on the screen through the kitchen window, churning the stew. Over the intercom, Miss Thirst called for Dylan Dew. Dylan covered his pot, wiped his hands, and made his way up the stairs under the LED glow of the Hemlock Industries logo. A woman named Tina Cordata, Jim's right hand, smiled as she gestured for Dylan to approach the office door. She had large, kind, doe-like eyes, and whenever Dylan saw her, he had the irresistible urge to wave and smile. Big day today, she whispered. As Dylan approached the door, he nervously smiled as he brushed past her and walked into the office. Have a seat, my boy, said the most soothing and resonant voice Dylan still had ever heard. Tina rested her hand on Dylan's shoulder for a moment as she passed. She sat at the head of the table next to Jim and promptly whispered something in his ear. Dylan clumsily wiggled in between the heavy oak chair and the frosted glass conference table. Rug, wood, and glass squeaking about until he froze. His eyes had just locked with Jim's as he coolly looked up from his notebook. Jim had the charisma of Will Smith, the voice of James Earl Jones, and the chiseled yet approachable smile of Jim Carrey. He was an ageless man with a thick head of platinum blonde hair and lived all the lives that Dylan had daydreamed about. Treks through uncharted Amazon rainforest, excursions to the Arctic, lounging in secluded mansions in Calabasas, and subsistence farming on a private island in the Bermuda Triangle. Jim was a towering man, and every week during their mandatory 2-minute one-on-one sessions, Dylan had to consciously remind himself that Jim Hemlock wasn't actually his father. Ah, Dylan, my child, looking good. Have you been hitting the gym? Thank you, Father. I'm trying. Good. You worked in a movie theater for some time, correct? Yes, Father, I did. Tell me. Jim swiftly rose from his black leather executive office chair with such command that Dylan was pushed back into his seat. He darted like a shadow past his framed pictures with Malala Yousafzai, Gary Vaynerchuk, and the Dalai Lama. His broad-shouldered reflection undulating on the polished surfaces of his many awards and on his large oak shelf. You could have almost missed the ease with which he buttoned his tailored suit jacket as he passed Dylan and headed to the corner of the room, leaving his subtle but exhilarating scent of aftershave, coffee, and cologne in his wake. Dylan, suddenly very aware of his pit stains and the strong smell of garlic and smoke on his Hemlock Industries jumpsuit, curled his shoulders forward and tucked his elbows into his sides. He turned halfway around in his chair and beheld Jim pulling away a black velvet dust cover from a sleek, high-end, short-throw laser cinema projector. Do you know how to operate one of these? Dylan closed his mouth and gave a nod. Yes, Father. He'd only ever seen one like it on the internet. Great. You can meet us here tomorrow morning at 8. Dylan floated back down to the kitchen. He added the protein chunks to his usual Thursday vat of stew, the one with bell peppers, garlic, broad beans, sweet potato, and corn. He couldn't believe how fast things were turning around for him. His acne had cleared up. He felt fit and energetic. He was eager to get up every morning, which to him was almost surreal. He had even learned to love the soreness of his muscles when he went to bed at night. As he and the rest of the kitchen staff readied the chafing dishes, the new recruits, field workers, and marketing department lined up along the kitchen's tray rails to get their supper. Astor Clark, who was Dylan's first friend when he started out in the field back in September, slid her saucer towards his station. She gave him a friendly smile and affectionate middle finger as he hovered an extra spoonful of stew in front of her, took it away, and then artfully plopped it down on her saucer as if putting the final touch on a masterpiece. The towering Tim Hemlock, aka It, lumbered down the line with his usual 3 saucers. You holding up there, Timmy? Dylan chimed, half ribbing, half concerned over Tim's bandaged right hand. He churned the ladle extra deep to get an extra few big pieces of protein chunk. Oh, this? Tim boomed. Oh, this? Tim boomed. His voice at least 10 times deeper than his older brother Jim's. He furrowed his massive brow, inspecting the bandage as though he had only just seen it for the first time. Then, in quick succession, blew on it and the callous knuckles of his left hand and smiled. That's just a little hard work. Even Tina Cordata grabbed a bowl, smiling pleasantly and moving a stray lock away from her face as Dylan playfully counted up her usual request of 4 pieces of sweet potato. Only Jim, Miss Thirst, and the auxiliary staff didn't eat with the rest of the company. They were usually so busy organizing the night showing that they skipped supper. On Thursdays, all participants of the Win-Win program came together for a relaxing night of stew and cinema. The auxiliary staff would lay blankets on the floor of the seminar room, and everyone would lounge and eat stew as they watched a film from Jim Hemlock's personal collection. Usually slow-paced and educational, a documentary on nature, philosophy, some branch of science, or the impacts of climate change. It was typical for the whole commune to fall asleep together in the seminar room, strewn about in their jumpsuits among the soft hypoallergenic pillows and blankets, bellies full of warm stew. And when they awoke on Friday mornings and headed to their individual living quarters, they typically find that they had been cleaned and organized for them as they slept. Dillon figured Jim and Miss Thirst arranged for this as a bit of respite from the rest of the week's usually hectic schedule. It had bothered Dillon at first, but now he saw it as commonplace. The Win-Win program was a brilliant operation. In the center of the compound was a high-tech subsistence greenhouse affectionately called the Field. It yielded them food all year round. To the east of that was a research lab and two conjoined manufacturing hubs, one which produced the nutrient-rich protein chunks which often supplemented their vegetarian meals, the other small electronics. To the south was a waste processing facility which recycled their solid waste and water for fertilizer and irrigation. On the west side was cohabitation, which consisted of a yoga studio, gymnasium, bathrooms, and their living quarters. The main building resided up north and was simply called Main. That was where you found the seminar room, kitchen, testing rooms, and the offices of Jim Hemlock and Miss Thirst. The morning bell rung, and Dillon groggily sauntered back to his living quarters in cohabitation, along with the other 100 plus win-winners and recruits. Their clumsy bodies roamed the misty morning grass like a horde of zombies. He was all too glad to collapse onto his freshly spread bed sheets and stare at his bone-white ceiling as he shook the sleep from his baggy eyes. He joined the bathroom queue and took his daily 3-minute water ration shower. He was happy for the crisp air jets of the solar-powered drying chamber. He was grateful for his yellow, enzyme-retted, vegetable-dyed linen win-win jumpers. He didn't miss his cluttered one-room apartment or his job at the movie theater. He had at last a home. Apart from a few contracts with the Ministries of Education, Agriculture and Health, Hemlock Industries relied on revenue from its sale of digital goods and the licensing of over 30 patents to various corporate entities. The Win-Win program was Jim Hemlock's first business venture outside of the tech space and an attempt to address climate change and the rise in unemployment rates amongst generations Y and Z. Everyone in phase 2 of the Win-Win program lived on the compound and was provided everything they needed to live. They didn't have to worry about bills, taxes, rent, food, or clothing. You participated in tests, you contributed to the commune, and you had earned your share. The higher your rank on the scoreboard, the more perks afforded to you. Extra shower tokens, bonus learning courses, and the golden ticket, money towards your bank account when you exited the program. If you did well enough, you could even move up to the gate, the part of the program where you got to travel and explore and earn tons of cash, or at least that's what Dylan heard. The details of the gate weren't quite clear. Tina Cordata had been the highest ranking winner in phase 1 of the program. She had participated in the gate and wasn't allowed to disclose any information. The only thing Dylan knew for sure was that Jim liked her so much he offered her a permanent position after she had returned. The time was 7:59 a.m. as Dylan bounded the stairs. He expected the usual warm welcome of Tina Cordata, but instead saw Miss Thirst sitting patiently at the door to Jim's office. DNA Thirst was a lawyer, human resources officer, and occasional public relations person for the Win-Win program. When Jim and Tina were incapacitated or on one of their monthly work trips out of town, Miss Thirst was left in charge. Jim and DNA were cut from the same charisma stock, and as Dylan approached, she looked to her wristwatch, then turned to him with an award-winning smile. Just in time. Her loose brown curls framed her charmingly plump cheeks, which turned her eyes into sideways crescent moons whenever her full-bodied lips unfurled her perfect 42s. Her voice was like honey, and one could be excused for being overwhelmed when alone in a room with both her and Jim. Dylan had often wondered how very attractive people endure a world filled with achingly average people such as himself. He supposed they probably didn't have much choice but to get on with it. He, on the other hand, in this room, felt a couple rungs down on the evolutionary ladder. Dylan, when you signed your standard work exchange contract with us 5 months ago, you also signed a non-disclosure agreement, which applies to what you will see and be told today, Miss Thirst began. Dylan was sitting down the table from them, and though they were sitting too, he felt as though he had to crane his neck to be on their level. You've been a critical part of the success of Phase 2 of the Win-Win program, and as we move toward implementing Phase 3, we wish to request more from you. We will be running a series of human trials on a new form of media production, and we would like to enlist your services as projectionist. You are our first choice. Jim and Mr. smiled at Dylan, and immediately his heart began to flutter. He was sure that he had never been anyone's first choice for anything, and the joy in his heart filled his chest and collected as tears in his eyes as he exhaled. Miss Thirst got up and walked towards Dylan with a thick document in a red sleeve. As she approached, she pulled a ballpoint pen from the pocket of her tailored jacket. He didn't remember raising his arms or opening the sleeve, but there in his hand was 20 or so pages of legalese. The first page with his name and a sum of money he would have never in his wildest dreams imagined written under it. In the sleeve is a revised contract for your compliance in the second experimental program, as well as a waiver agreement. If you choose to sign, at the end of your successful participation in the program, you will be compensated the sum stated on page 1 of the document. I'm sure you'll find it more than satisfactory. Miss Thirst took a few steps back. The angelic smell of her perfume now wafting through Dylan's nostrils, and the crisp breeze from the open window caressing his skin ignited daydreams of daydreams within his head. Goosebumps ran the length of his neck and shoulders down to his trembling arms. His eyes scanned his name and the sum over and over, trying to reveal the surely hidden fault in his vision, and yet there it remained, unchanged. I believe we are on the cusp of a new age of content creation, Dylan. Every revolutionary step in mankind needs its pioneers, and you, my boy, are in the right place at the right time and equipped with the right skills for this particular new frontier. Jim did have a way with words. Still, Dylan hesitated. Enough had gone wrong in Dylan Dew's life for him to be wary of good fortune. He had made too many mistakes to just hop, skip, and jump into something new without thinking it over first, or without at least reading the fine print. Father, would it be okay if I had the day to think about it? Jim's face collapsed into a look that Dylan had never seen on him before, but a look he was all too familiar with. The look of disappointment. Oh, yes, of course. Jim gave a slight nod to Miss Thirst, who nodded in return, and then turned to give Dylan a labored smile. You can let Miss Thirst know when you've made your decision, and if the slot is still available, it's all yours. Miss Thirst politely motioned for Dylan to return her pen, and then motioned Dylan towards the door. Jim lifted another document in a red sleeve from a drawer under his frosted glass conference table and turned his back to Dylan, with all the added smoothness afforded to him by his black leather executive office chair. Dylan's stomach sunk under his shaking knees as he stood up, and it felt as though it and his heart would surely fall out if he began to walk away. As he turned around, Miss Thirst opened the door, and almost as if it was rehearsed, 10 other eager faces in the hallway turned to gawk inside, the enthusiasm in their eyes like teeming goldfish fighting to get a crumb. So Dylan stopped and asked for a pen. Alright, chapter 3. It's the last chapter, guys, and it is not finished, so yeah. I've developed a coding language that interprets and translates brain signals to light, Jim explained. Human memories, thoughts, dreams, infinite sources of wonder can be projected as images and recorded. Movies directly from your mind. Jim took Dylan beyond the red door of the research lab. He had only ever seen the inside of it in the win-win recruiting video. The auxiliary staff looked up at them with weary eyes from behind the safety glass as Jim and Dylan passed through the side tunnel. Usually Dylan was captivated by whatever Jim had to say, but he could barely hear him now over the loudness of his thoughts. As he observed large robotic jaws and valves chew and excrete, and men and women rummaging to inspect what came out. At the end of the side tunnel was a door which opened up to a very steep stairwell which led downwards. Dylan never knew there was an underground and was surprised at how deep it went. The stairs ended at another door, heavier and more secure looking than the previous two. Jim took an access key from his pocket and swiped, and then presented the digital port key with his retina to be scanned. It was at that moment that the gravity of the situation started to dawn upon Dylan. This was some James Bond, Mission Impossible, X-Files type shit. The door made a hissing sound as it opened, and Jim explained that they were walking into a pressurized sanitation port. It looked like a surgical scrub room with large vents pumping air in and out. Jim pointed Dylan to 2 yellow rubber jumpsuits in the first of the 2 chambers in front of them, and told him that the one on the far right was his. He showed him the containers for his clothes and shoes above the showers. He told Dylan that if he had to relieve himself or throw up, that he was to do it in the designated waste area to the far right, and that he was to strip down and shower before every entry into the lab. Dylan was trying his best to listen, but distracted by the revelation of this entire secret operation, found himself ruminating over what Jim had said about if you need to relieve yourself or throw up, and wondered if Jim was making a judgment on his constitution. If maybe Jim thought him weak or not able to handle what was to come. That was until he looked through the window of the sanitation port into the lab next door. There, reclined and bolted to a metal table in a blue hospital gown, was Tina Cordata, the top of her skull removed, her brain exposed, and thousands of thin metal probes protruding from it like some sort of demented chia pet. Another person dressed in the 3rd yellow rubber jumpsuit was attaching wires from each of those rods to a computer which displayed a series of brain scans in rapid succession. Dylan was frozen in absolute horror. And then Tina Cordata rolled her bruised, doe-like eyes in his direction and gave him a familiar smile. He felt last night's stew rising up through his throat from his stomach. "To the right, for Christ's sakes, boy!" Jim lamented as Dylan shuffled to the designated waste area, juggling his vomit in his hands to prevent it from falling to the floor. Okay. Historical documents state that the first motion pictures were presented and received a lot like parlor tricks. A single shot of a train entering a railway station, projected indoors in black and white, was such a spectacle that audiences leapt from their seats in fear of being run over. So imagine now seeing the actual ghosts of someone's dreams projected in crisp 4K resolution at 60 frames per second as their body lay in front of you. Their mind's eye conjuring humans and creatures in landscapes hellish and ethereal instantly from the input of your voice. Jim told Dylan to ask Tina a question, and as he stuttered to think of something interesting to ask, he saw what looked like his own face conjured on the screen, echoing his every mumble. It looked like his face, but mixed with her face and the face of who he would later identify as her brother. And the faces twisted and morphed into each other, and were at once separate and distinct, and a completely new amalgamation. So yeah, that's where it is now, guys. Thanks for joining in. Yo, Lola, big up yourself. Hey, Jessica, big up yourself. Hey, everybody, thanks for joining in. You bros owned him. What a travesty, man. We don't know, man. We don't know why that's mixed like that. So this is a story I wrote, and hopefully I get to continue it. I think it's really cool. But yeah, that's it, guys. Later. Bye.
Avenue.